Great. So as I said, this is the last session of Open Education Week 2023 at the University of Waterloo. The title is Considerations for Managing and Disseminating OER. And we are joined today by Carrie Weaver, the Learning, Teaching, and Instructional Design Librarian. Carrie is the Learning, Teaching, and Instructional Design Librarian at the University of Waterloo. She holds her Master of Library and Information Science from the University of Rhode Island and her Doctorate of Education in Curriculum and Instruction from the University of South Carolina. Her publications focus on accessibility, pedagogical approaches to teaching, information seeking, critical thinking, and student information behavior across academic disciplines. So thank you very much for joining us, Carrie, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks so much. I will go ahead and share my own presentation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about managing and disseminating OER today, and I will be fully direct in that a lot of my experience is based on a project that we have done within the library at the University of Waterloo in the time that I've been here, which I will talk about a little bit more in depth, where we created an open repository for our OER content. But a lot of what has been learned from that project is really helpful toward understanding the management and dissemination of OER more broadly. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about that overall history. So the University of Waterloo hired my position, which was originally the instructional design librarian position, in 2017. And the purpose of that position was to oversee most of the educational functions of the library at kind of a higher strategic level, but from an operational perspective, to think about how the library could actually more effectively do online learning, and specifically do online learning through the provision of open educational resources, because there is a strong recognition in libraries that the reuse of content is really helpful, and that people learn and need learning materials at all hours of the day and night when there might not necessarily be professional staff available to help support them. And so learning objects can really help fill that gap. When my position was hired, the library had a very small number of learning objects, but they were purely in video format. So I believe there were 2 or 3 Camtasia items and a small handful of Powtoon videos. And all of those were housed on a branded YouTube channel that a staff member in the library had overseen. But learning objects tend to be much more expansive than just video content. And that certainly wasn't the only type of content that we wanted to be able to host and share with people. And so housing things on a YouTube channel wasn't going to be long-term sustainable as an approach for dissemination. And there were a lot of other considerations to doing this. So in addition to wanting it to be open, it needed to be something that could be indexed in Google to make it more discoverable. It needed to be something that could handle things from a wide variety of different formats, and that could be adapted over time to allow for new formats to be added, which is one of the biggest issues, I will say, with managing OERs. And it needed to be something within the Waterloo context especially, but within the context of libraries, we have a very strong emphasis on providing credit for individuals and named credit for individuals. So this is about honoring people's contributions and intellectual property contributions, even if we're paying them for that work. there's still very much a need to recognize the work that individuals do. And this is particularly a consideration within the library sphere because it's quite common for people in libraries to move organizations and institutions. And so to be able to have their name put on intellectual property that they provided design or content for is really important toward being able to take that as an example of the kind of work that they have done forward into the rest of their career and their life. So all of these were considerations. So in 2018, and also it had to be technically something that we had the ability to actually create and maintain in some fashion. So my position, I was hired in 2017. In 2018, we began the conversations about what this would look like and what platform would make the most sense, what metadata standards, so organizing the material to make it findable and so that like things could be together. So what metadata standards and what a collection development policy would look like. And this is a very library thing, but to a certain extent, when you're talking about managing OER, considering and taking some time to put into the development of what is in scope and what is out of scope for what you are going to be maintaining and what you're going to be collecting is one of the most valuable things that you can do because the reality is you are never going to have a situation where you can support every possible format. And where you have enough capacity, staffing, storage space to be able to do absolutely everything that you need to do. Or not that you need to do, but that you might wish to do. And so it becomes really important at the outset of the project to take on something that has some flexibility for growth, but also that has a very clear scope and purpose. And that will help the management overall. So moving on from that, so what we created in the library to do this is what we call for short the OLOR, and I will call it the OLOR, but it's the library's online learning object repository. And it has been a collaboration between the digital initiatives department and the instructional design team for the duration of its development. So the Digital Initiatives Department provides the knowledge of the technical components and also has expertise in online repositories, metadata standards, that sort of thing. The instructional design team, which is headed by me, has expertise in online pedagogy and design of online learning objects. And also we have one position that's been filled by a co-op student where we do custom graphic design for a lot of our OER, which is certainly a consideration because copyright issues can abound when you're trying to create OER properties. And one of the easiest ways to work around that is to simply put yourself in a position where copyright consideration is already covered by the fact that you have paid somebody for those visuals. So as I said, we started development of this project in 2018. We launched in beta on July 15th, 2020, and it still persists in beta today. It was launched in beta, you might notice from that date, as a pandemic response because we had started building learning objects and we were periodically integrating them into the campus learning management system for particular courses when needed. But we were still working toward this dream of having an open and discoverable presence online where people could view and interact with our open educational resources. And at the moment when everything went to an emergency response, we moved our timeline up from expecting another 6 months to a year of development to getting it done and out there to the best of our ability within 3 months. So the repository is particularly useful, and we see that repositories are a major way that people manage and make discoverable or disseminate their OER. So this is a fairly reasonable approach to doing this work. And within the library context, repositories are kind of something we do. So it made a lot of sense for us, certainly, to tackle it in this way. But it provides a place for us to collect, share, and make discoverable our online learning objects. And the online learning objects are in a variety of different formats. So we have modular-based things. We have a number of infographics. We have some worksheets and handouts. We have some slide decks that get used for training purposes or are used by individuals and can be taken and adapted on particular topics. It's meant for the use of the entire University of Waterloo community, but has had reach significantly beyond that. In fact, we know that there are materials, because people are generous enough to tell us this, that are being used in programs as requirements in curricular programs in Virginia in the US, in Queensland, in Australia, in BC, out west here in Canada, and at other institutions here in Ontario. So even though our primary purpose and audience and our most immediate concern is for use of the materials by the University of Waterloo community, we know that it's had significant impact way beyond that. But I will say, it is always going to continue to be a difficulty because there are technical aspects of maintaining this work, and then there are content aspects of actually continuing to curate and stay firm on what actually goes there and what is reasonable for us to manage over time. And I will say we do all of this. We have a very small instructional design team because the library's instructional design team at the university just meets the needs of instructional design work within the library. There are other campus entities with wonderful, super well-qualified professionals who serve the needs of other aspects of instructional design work around campus. And so part of our scoping for this project is that the work of the team is already scoped in that we are doing library-specific, library-led, library-engaged, library-involved content and delivery. So with that, currently, the online learning object repository runs on Drupal 8, which is an open source platform. We were able to take some work that some other institutions had done, not exactly on this type of repository, but on other repositories using Drupal. And we were able to customize that off of that work that had already been done, that development work that had already been done, so that we can have images, PDFs, articulate modules. We also had to add H5P modules in response to some grant-funded projects, slide decks, infographics, and we have a landing page where people can search and interact. very few people actually care about that. The majority of people who are coming into the resources do come into them through a Google search. So the discoverability in disseminating the OER content, it's really essential that however you are managing it, you make sure that it's properly indexed in Google. And at this point, we do get some information through Google Analytics, but the Google Analytics platform is changing. So we're currently in the process of considering what exactly are we going to be able to get as far as analytics go about the use of these materials. But we've seen year over year dramatic increases, doubling, tripling of the use of the materials. And we do see continued and sustained growth. And I will note that the link is on this slide, but we're lib.uwaterloo.ca/online_learning. I think that's slash or backslash. You can read it anyhow. But you're welcome to peruse. I mean, this is available to everyone here in the community and beyond. So in that growth, we actually saw from the launch date to present the collection grow by over 400% in 2 years. So this really taught us quite a lot about thank you so much, Abby, about the collection maintenance. And this is really one of the big issues that I wanted to talk about today. So a lot of times when people think of OERs, they think of the development of OERs and they go through the project and they create something and yay, it works. And then they put it out there and they just kind of like leave it. And they just sort of leave it until the end of time. And one of the things that we have found in doing this work is actually that OERs take quite a lot more maintenance and updating than you might think. You may have linked to resources external. So for instance, something that just happened today is that we had or maybe yesterday, we had a course that we offer, an online module-based course on socio-demographic statistics, some government information that's really important for entrepreneurial work, for I think they use it in some of the accounting courses and actuarial science courses. So it has applications across disciplines, and the government of Canada updated to a new census. And so we had to actually go in and provide an update to where you get to the new census information, when what we had in the module was the old census information. And this seems very small, but these are the kinds of examples that happen all the time. And in fact, we have seen a movement in the amount of time that we spend doing that kind of legacy maintenance of the OER content, so that if we're spending, say, about a month of time, we're probably spending between 3 days to a week worth of work time in any given month, taking care of legacy maintenance issues and updating of existing properties. And that updating may be, perhaps there's a new librarian for a particular subject area. Perhaps it just hasn't been something that we've touched. And so there's outdated information or content that we're linking to, or it could sometimes be even language issues. If you think about the development of how we talk about concepts like indigenization or inclusive pedagogies, things change over time in higher education. And so you have to always be looking to your existing instructional properties with an eye toward those changes having happened or those changes needing to happen within your instructional properties. And this is actually, I think, one of the big things that when we're discussing open educational resources, we don't really discuss those legacy maintenance issues and what is involved in that. In addition to people alerting us if they find things that need to be updated, or in the case of the socioeconomic demographics example, the librarian knew that those had been updated because she received a notification that the new census data was out and knew that we needed to go and update that. So she was willing to let us, but we actually have to go through a process about once a year where we review all of the materials. And that's for content, but also for accessibility compliance, which is one of the other things that comes up, is that accessibility legislation and requirements do change over time. And as much as you try to do the best that you can possibly do when you're designing the materials to comply with accessibility expectations, the technology improves and changes over time to allow you to do things that maybe weren't previously accessible as accessible now. Or you may have learned something in the intervening time that allows you to do it more effectively. And so there may be options or opportunities that weren't available that you now need to integrate. And all of these things are issues. Within the library context, we have one additional thing that really is a maintenance issue for us, which is that there are some instructional properties where part of what we're trying to walk you through is how to use a particular interface. So how to use a particular database or other piece of information access technology that the library specifically purchases. And what we have found is that even though a lot of our vendors do supply information, that information tends to be at a level that doesn't work for our learners very well. And so it tends to be sort of like, let me give you 50,000 videos of 25 minutes a piece to walk you through every possible iteration of this database interface that you might use. Our users aren't that interested in that. To be quite honest, as librarians with expertise in this, we aren't even that interested in that. So we're not totally sure who our vendors are making this content for. But we often find that we actually will need to create things on like how to do a date limited search in Scopus, for example, and that's an issue. However, every time that the interface of the Scopus database changes, the specifics of how you do that date limited search in Scopus can in fact also change. And so our vendors, who we would love to love more than we do, don't always let us know when those changes are going to be happening. So sometimes we have kind of emergency situations where we have to swap out and do maintenance on content because there's been an interface change, and that really dramatically impacts our users. And I will say that issue right there is a huge consideration for our OER, but is also a really particular reason why the library has its own group of instructional design folks, because we can barely stay on top of these sorts of issues. And it's not something that outside of the library sphere we could necessarily ask somebody else to be responsible for or on top of. There has been a need for more intentional management and development partnership. And through this, we found that we were always working with our digital initiatives unit, but we were also finding on the instructional design team that we were learning quite a lot through doing this over time. And so we decided to implement an approach where we would, instead of just touching base when there were problems, touch base more regularly, so that we could align the sort of discovery aspects and dissemination aspects and the content development and sort of the movement on the instructional design side with the technical back end. And so that ended up being a standard monthly meeting that we have. I know we love more meetings, but that ended up being a standard monthly meeting. And then we will set additional touch points if there are particular aspects of the project that we need to have more time on. And this has actually allowed us to consider sometimes if we're thinking about, well, maybe we need to add a new format because the particular formats that we have aren't allowing us to do something. It gives us an opportunity to research it on the back end and consider whether or not we're going to be able to support that new format. So a great example of this is when we actually were forced into adopting the H5P format for some module-based grant work funded projects. And we didn't necessarily want to do it, but because we were meeting regularly, we did figure out that we were able to support H5P based modules. They're still not our favorite, but that's for some different reasons. But it allowed us to be more nimble. So one of the things that I would say is you are going to need more than just you, and it's probably going to be a whole team of people to successfully manage and disseminate OER. And having regular and continuing touch points is one of the most effective ways to try to manage that. There are also ongoing questions around who primarily develops content and who does the design. We have questions about this quite a lot in the library because we have a split between the people, the instructional design team doing the actual design work and our partners in the digital initiatives department who are doing the technical work. But then we have content being supplied from other librarians around the library and sometimes from faculty members who are working with librarians on particular, excuse me, on particular content. And so one of the things that has really helped us scope about whether or not this is going to be something that we manage or if this is somebody else's responsibility somewhere out there in the world is if we do the design within the instructional design team, then it can wind up in the OLOR. Because we have access to that design work, we have the ability to put it into our process for that maintenance process. And therefore, if it needs to be addressed again later, which it will be, we're able to do that. And we don't have to try to chase somebody down or figure out, oh, gee, somebody has left the university, now who's responsible for this orphan thing? So if we do the design work, we take ownership of it. If it's not something that we directly have done the design work for, it doesn't go in the OLOR, and that's outside of our scope. And that's not because we wouldn't like to be more helpful, but it's because realistically, if we were to take on more, we would need significantly more staffing to handle the ongoing maintenance concerns of managing materials beyond the library. And finally, we're working because we launched in beta and we've been in beta for now longer than we would have liked, we are currently working on refining the scope even further based on the knowledge of our experience working on this project, and looking at how it's grown over the last few years, and thinking about what the next iteration will actually look like. So we know that we will need no fewer number of formats than we already have. But we're also considering whether or not things like, for example, video format. We don't have a lot of materials in video format, and there are other hosting options for those materials if we did have them. Do we want them to go here, or do we feel like they're more discoverable elsewhere? And these are the kinds of conversations when you're really scoping or rescoping these projects that you have about the management and dissemination. I will say one of the things that we did that made it a little bit extra difficult, but this was based on really strong user feedback while we were early in the development process, is that within the OLOR, we actually insist that you can see like a preview or interact with that content in the OLOR instead of having to download everything or go somewhere else. And what we see with a lot of the OER like aggregate repositories, well, they're calling themselves repositories, but is that when people have to go somewhere else to interact with the content, they won't, unless there's something really, really driving them to need that. But if they can interact with it right with it when they get to it from a Google search, they will stay there and interact with it longer. But from a technical consideration standpoint, it's a colossal pain in the behind to actually design something such that they can interact with a module and an infographic and a slide deck and all of these different formats within the repository itself. So these things are all considerations and issues that you have to balance when you're thinking about the management and dissemination of open educational resources. So finally, a few lessons learned that we, as I'm speaking for all of the people who have been involved in this project and with this work within the library. The first thing is that learning object repositories are very different than other repositories. If you think about more traditional repositories like UW Space, where people are putting their dissertation and theses, you put your dissertation in there, it's going to be like it is till the end of time. There might need to be some accessibility work on it sometime later, but it's pretty much going to be in that one format, and it's not really going to be touched or updated outside of maybe those accessibility considerations for forever. Learning objects have to be touched. We were hoping to be maybe every 18 months. We're finding more like an average of every 9 months. Things have to be updated with a learning object in open educational resource repository. People will not always use the materials quite in the way that you expected, and some of that will be surprise and delight. Some of that will be you getting called in about somebody saying, well, they followed exactly this, and now they're being brought up on plagiarism charges. What do you have to say about that? What you actually need and what you think you need are probably going to be in tension with one another. When you start these projects, you have a lot of fabulous ideas and really excitement and vision for how much you can do and how much can change the world. And you're probably going to peel that back quite a lot and scope it in such a way that it's something that you can do that, but in a very particular box in a much more narrow window. And finally, that this isn't just something that you can do and check off and say, yay, done. Whenever you're dealing with OER, the only constant is going to be change, and you're going to have to continue adapting and changing over time. So with that, I want to just know we have some credits in licensing, and I just want to really openly thank Krista Godfrey, who's the head of our digital initiatives department at the library, who has been my partner throughout this project and has provided certainly some of the thoughts that I wanted to share today. And the members of the library's instructional design team, particularly Steph Wojcita, who you see here, Library Associate Instructional Design, who has been my partner in crime throughout our discovery of this entire process, and manages the back end of the OLOR on the day-to-day and takes care of everybody's panicked, please update this, I have a class tomorrow kind of requests.